Though the central security building was one of the grandest structures in the dome, Alexei's mind was far too occupied to even give it a glance as he strode across the open courtyard towards the imposing portico. All that was on his mind was that it was early, too early to be anywhere but in his quarters, and that wasn't even considering that it was his first morning back on Terran after 2 consecutive tours of duty on the frontier. He muttered to himself that the crew deserved better than this after what they had been through. The click of his heels on the tiled walkway seemed to drill sharply into his brain, reminding him that last night was supposed to have been a quick gathering. It was always the same at the end of a tour. Everybody patted each other on the back, said what a great job they had done, and then quickly went their separate ways. As commander, it was expected that he shout the first round before melting away as serious celebrations began. But it hadn't turned out that way. Instead of leaving once he had seen them relax, he had felt the need to stay, and stay, and stay. Now he was paying for it. His head felt thick, his body felt tired. He desperately needed a krill tablet, not being woken with a summons to come immediately to Ellis's offices. That was the last thing he needed. Why do they keep the place so cool, he muttered, his finger adjusting the thermal valve secreted under the uniform lapel. Immediately he felt more comfortable, though he often wondered how much of that was in his mind. Outside the weather shield he could see the snow, deep and endless up into the foothills, and on over the peaks of Telek Nail. Bad mood or not, he begrudgingly admitted, it did look remarkably beautiful, especially with the green high forests trusting out of the blanket of white. At times such as this it puzzled him why the ancestors had chosen Terran to colonize, when they had all the other warmer planets to choose from. Still another half a revolution and they would have left the white dwarf that was the binary partner of Sol, and be back in the warmth. Then there would be an explosion of growth. Rainforest vegetation in the coastal regions and baking deserts up on the tablelands. Once more the heat would take over, banishing the cold to the other end of the season. Thinking about it, actually he could see why they had chosen Terran. He smiled to himself. Good morning, Commander. The voice surprised. No, not surprised, startled him back to reality. Good morning, Isla, he replied to the electronically induced sound from his ear implant. Director Ellis has been informed of your arrival. What mood is he in? Have I your confidence, Commander? Alexei wondered for a moment who such an attractive, and he had to admit appealing tone of speech, had once belonged to. He put out of his mind that apparently each individual heard what appealed particularly to him, or her. Of course, Isla. Then he is rather grumpy. Oh. That he didn't want to hear. Any reason? Not that I can divulge, Commander. I see, you don't know. Yes, I do, Commander, the voice sounded faintly offended. And you're going to keep it a secret? I have to, Commander. You know very well to not do as I am bid would go against the rule of my existence. Yes, I know, but even to me? He tried to sound hurt. You put me in a position where my friendship goes against my duty, Commander. I see. And which shall win? Is there any doubt? Alexei sighed deeply, in mock rejection. I suppose I will have to live with being no more than a castaway, an ignored ex-friend. Commander, I doubt you would ever consider yourself as such. No, Isla, he grinned, feeling his mood rising as he looked towards at the first rays of sunlight, glinting off the mountaintops. And neither do I imagine you would do anything wrong, even for a moment. Isla giggled. Ah, Commander, you never know? Don't tell me, you're waiting for the right processor to. Alexei stopped and shook his head. What a start, he was flirting with a series of induced vibrations in his inner ear. Commander? Yes. Actually, if I look over my parameters. Director Ellis did not specify. I was not to reveal that he is not alone. Who is he with? A Professor Thane. Thane? No, means nothing to me. An anthropologist, at the astrohistory faculty of the College of Cisse, on Tiber Anwin. Oh, he said with mock enthusiasm. That sounds very exciting. Commander, the voice was slightly scolding. Not everyone needs, or sees the life of a soldier as the ultimate achievement. No. I'm sorry. You're quite correct, somebody has to do all the boring stuff. There was no reply. Damned processors, he muttered silently. Sometimes they were like being joined. You had to be careful with every word or you were always upsetting the other half. His mind suddenly wandered to her. It had been this time during last freezing, when they had agreed to separate. It still hurt a little. He had really thought they would be partners for life, but relationships had never been his strong point, and it didn't look as if that was going to change. Thankfully it had been reasonably amicable. What he hadn't expected though was that she would leave after the agreement had been voided, and go back to live on Raygon, taking their 3 beautiful children with her. He hadn't, and still didn't want them to go. Yes, practicality, it was the best thing for them, but that didn't mean he had to like it. His mind drifted to their faces. It had been a long time since he had felt their embraces. Yes, he decided, when I've finished with Ellis, I'll comlink Raygon and ask if I can visit, of course assuming Zara will give her permission. He was in front of the building now. It was set at 8 levels above ground, being as there was little chance at this time of the turn that of one of the violent tropical hurricanes would sweep in from the ocean. Though if one did, it wasn't really a problem. It was common knowledge that within 20 parts the whole structure could descend below the surface against nature, or even quicker if under threat of attack by a Carol warship. The door was opening. Isla may not be communicating but was still doing what was required. He walked onto the inner 6th level. Immediately the sound of bird calls came to his ears. Long slender trunks of polywattle vine reached up to the roof of the atrium. Therein lower down swung flocks of brightly colored parrots. A primate sat on a branch at his level watching him suspiciously. Over the balustrade to his right, 6 floors down, was a small indoor lake. He could just make out the reds and pinks of flap fish swimming close to the surface. It was all very soothing and peaceful, but Ellis was waiting, and the Vader door was opening for him. He stepped inside. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry. I don't know what you're referring to, Commander." The reply was half curious. "Everybody has their place. Everybody has their duty, and just because I find it of little interest, I should not belittle them." "No, you shouldn't, Commander." The voice bore a slight chastising tone. "None are greater or less useful than another in our society. That is what makes us different from the Karo." "This professor," he interrupted. "Thane? Thane," he repeated to himself. "Yes. What has astrohistory got to do with a destroyer's officer? We are all a product of our roots, Commander. It's too early to be cryptic, Isla." "I wasn't. I was merely pointing out that we are the sum of our communal experience. I realize that. But there's nothing from the past where I live. I cruise a warship. Fighting on the frontier, protecting the colonies, the future is all that I'm interested in. Many have said and thought the same throughout the history of humankind, and found that the highway to one's destiny is learned on the byroads of the past. You're not going to tell me anything else before I face Ellis, are you?" "No, Commander." The Vader stopped and the door slid open. He stepped into the outer office. It was empty, except for Alana sat before her screen, entering something into her workstation. She looked up from behind the desk, lifting her hand as she did, deliberately pushing with her index finger at the bridge of a pair of antique spectacles that were the current fashion. The lenses seemed to hang magically against her forehead. "Commander," she beamed with obvious pleasure. "How nice it is to see you again. And for me to see you, Alana. How do things look on the frontier?" "Not as nice as they look from where I stand right now, Commander," she blushed. "You know I'm almost a partner. All the more reason to tell you, before it's too late and Ander claims his prize." Suddenly a booming voice assaulted his ears. "Is that you, Commander?" Alexei hadn't noticed the door was partly open. "Yes, Director," he answered formally. "Then come through, and stop harassing my secretary. She has enough to do without you interrupting her." "Director Ellis is waiting to see you, Commander," said the silently laughing girl. Alexei shook his head as he walked towards the heavy door. He pushed it fully open. Ellis was standing alongside a large ornate chair. Another was across to his left, and between them was the back of a couch, upholstered in the same brocade material. They formed a semicircle before a timber-fueled fire, burning in a large open grate set into the wall opposite. To Alexei's left was the panorama of the snow-covered mountains. The window was floor-to-ceiling, and wall-to-wall. As a first impression, it appeared the building had no external wall, and many visitors stayed well clear, for in the unaccustomed it caused a distinct feeling of vertigo. Here they were far above the weather shield, and even Alexei had a momentarily feeling of warmth on his right and cold on his left. He quickly turned the thermal valve off. "Director?" "Come in, Commander," the voice was barely warmer than before. "And shut the door." Alexei backstepped, then strode silently across the carpeted floor. He had forgotten the third person in the room. Indeed, he still couldn't see anyone hidden behind the high back of the couch. It wasn't until he came alongside it that he saw her. It hadn't crossed his mind it could be a woman. Now he wondered why. She was striking. Long black hair, a perfectly formed face. She was dressed in the latest Terran suit. Alexei knew that from a magazine he had seen lying on some wardroom table recently. She was standing now and offering her arm. "Commander." Their fingers clasped about each other's wrists. She felt cool. "Professor Thane," Alexei said, half as a greeting, half with incredibility. "Isla," muttered Ellis to his side disapprovingly. He stared vaguely into the air. "Close surveillance on my area." Then he looked back at Alexei. "You can let go of the professor's hand now, Commander," he grumbled. Alexei realized it was only he who continued the grip. He dropped his arm to his side. "I see you already know all about the professor," continued Ellis. "No." "Well..." He looked at her. "Only that you are an anthropologist from the astrohistory faculty, at CSA." "Nearly right, Commander," she smiled. Alexei looked at Ellis slightly confused. Isla was rarely wrong. The man grunted and spoke. "I take the wise precaution of not disclosing everything I do, even to Isla. But Professor Thane..." "Director." She interrupted him. "If we are to work together, it would be much easier if I dropped my formal title." "As you wish," Ellis said as he sat down in a single chair. "My name is Ria." She looked at Alexei. "Alexei." "Yes." "I did know." She smiled and his heart missed a beat. She sat down again. "As you surmised, I am from CSA, and from the College of Astrohistory. But I am afraid from there on all else becomes a little blurred. I have an office and a workroom in the anthropology faculty, but I am not an anthropologist." She looked at Ellis, as if seeking his approval. He nodded at her, and then looked at Alexei. "Sit down, Commander," You're making me feel uncomfortable standing there like a piece of furniture. Alexei walked to the other chair as she started to speak again. My position is actually a cover. I work for the DSD. For a moment Alexei was dumbfounded, and equally impressed. The Department of Scientific Defense was one of the most secretive organizations within the Alliance. There was only one acknowledged office, that was here on Terran, and it employed no more than a dozen people. Of course it was common knowledge, or rather common gossip, that their research facilities were spread throughout the planets, but this was the first time, even with the rank he held, that he had ever had official confirmation the organization existed outside the department's headquarters, never mind met one of its operatives. Alexei realized he had frozen half-seated. He quickly sat and sank into the soft cushion. She seemed amused. I take it you know of us. Alexei? Yes. Well, kind of. I assume that means you have listened to rumors? Well, yes. To be honest, I haven't a clue, other than I probably owe my life to suggestions, ideas, and weapons that you have come up with. Do not give me credit personally, Alexei. I'm no more than a contributor. She winked at him. He hadn't the foggiest idea what it implied. My personal expertise is in liquid ferroceramics. Suddenly it came to him. Thane, he said out loud, interrupting her mid-sentence. She stopped and looked at him in surprise. It had been at the back of his mind since he had heard Isla say the name. But the stern and very dowdily dressed woman behind the podium bore little resemblance to the one before him now. Last summer's season I attended reassignment on Talibi. There was a lecture on Ceralium. It was very interesting. He beamed in satisfaction. Why, Alexei, you surprise me. That I remember? No, more that you listened. I thought my entire audience was asleep. They both smiled, until Ellis's gruff voice interrupted. Can we get on with the business we are here for, Professor? They fell silent as he took the conversation over. What the professor is trying to tell you, Commander, is that composite metals and their derivatives are her area of specialization. And the reason she is here is that there are none better. Rhea looked at Alexei. Flattering, but not true, Director. There are many people who are my equal. Ellis brushed of her diffidence. Professor, modesty is all well and good, but by my information you come to me recommended as the best, and that's who I want. I said my equals, Director. I did not say they were better. Then please carry on. Rhea suddenly seemed less comfortable. Commander, future composites are where I am, but we can still learn a lot from analysis of the older and past metals. Alexei smiled and thought to himself. I've already been here. She was looking at him puzzled. Commander? Please go on. As I was saying, I find it personally interesting. I suppose it could class as a hobby, researching old, rare and disused metals and ores. And an ideal cover at CSA. It fits in quite nicely. Yes, but where do I fit into all this? You don't yet, said Ellis abruptly. Please continue, Professor. In my capacity I have direct access to all Alliance research projects. Recently one of our deep space mining vessels located a probe. Alexei stared at her curiously. Probe? What? A drone? Call it what you like. It was way out in the void area. Heading for Beta Prima, in another 100,000 turns. Anyway, they were testing deep rock spectrum equipment and had the full range turned on, and there you are, they picked up radioactive decay in the middle of nowhere. They surmised it was an exotic asteroid at first, but the emission was too pure, so they were instructed to send out a scout. And there it was, a probe. Alexei looked at a loss towards Ellis. The man sat expressionless. It was of tremendous, but limited scientific interest, continued Rhea. And in due course it found its way to Cisse, where I requested permission to undertake an analysis of the metals. She hesitated, seeing his expression. There is something you find curious, Commander? He tried to look serious. You said there was an emission. It was from the probe? Yes. The research was all done in the emissions laboratory. Its power core was rhenium. Does that stir any memory? Vaguely. I've never come across it, but I seem to remember from college that it's very dangerous and volatile, isn't it? Handled the wrong way, most certainly. If I recall correctly, it said it would be the first generated clean power that an emerging civilization would come across. I suppose that depends on the interpretation of clean you're using. Anyway, the metal parts themselves were corroded almost beyond belief. Wherever it had come from, it had been alone in space for many thousands of turns. Its composition was intriguing, basic and impure, yet a fresh perspective, as if someone had been working from an entirely new set of rules. So it was an alliance? She looked at him, puzzled. Alliance? He saw he was mistaken. Then it was a Carol probe? There was almost a smile on her face. He looked at Ellis, confused. You are assuming it's a probe from some time in our own past? Yes, he said uncertainly, unable to imagine an alternative. I suppose that a fair assumption. Rhea said, as if to accommodate his opinion. But as I said, it was as if whoever had created it was going down another technological path. It was all extremely interesting. Her tone of voice changed. But my excitement over its manufacture was nothing compared to what was attached to the side. She paused a moment, but Alexei showed no anticipation. There was a small golden plaque. The surface was almost degraded clean, but in our laboratories we were able to reconstruct what patterns or symbols had once been engraved there by examining the sublayer stress marking. And we found that on it the makers had identified themselves. She looked at Ellis, again seeking his approval, then back to Alexei, and straight into his eyes. Have you heard of the planet Earth? They both looked at him, and he at them. Nothing was said. At last he shook his head and started to laugh. Yes, I know about Earth. And he did. It was required reading in grade school, under legends and fantasies. When a little older he had sat through an elective class on the myth, bored out of his mind. So he did know about Earth, but if it hadn't have been for his awakening interest in the opposite sex, particularly for a girl named Juliana, he wouldn't have had a clue. Earth, the home planet of the ancestors. They had destroyed it with wars and contamination before they were driven off as its temperature climbed past human tolerance. The stories said they had lived for a few generations in massive orbiting satellite cities called arcs, before they gave the planet up as lost and set sail on a convoy to colonize another star system. Then at some time there had been the diverging, and the arcs, there were supposed to have been 60 of them, split into two factions. One founded Terran and the others colonized Plar, as the corporation's headquarters. They had been at war ever since. Earth. They both stared at him without speaking. Are you serious? He said disbelievingly. Neither replied. His reply was far less humorous as he realized. You are serious. Commander, Ellis at last spoke, sitting forward in his chair. When you come through that door everything that is discussed, is serious. Yes, dire. And I advise you that if you think this is some kind of entertainment venue, you use it to walk right back out of here. His voice firmed. Right, now. I am sorry, Director. He turned to the woman. Professor. I meant no disrespect. That is debatable, Commander. Snorted Ellis. You are well known for your attitude, Sometimes it borders on near arrogance. I tell you this, that there are those in the inner sanctum who argued against you being chosen, to the point of implying that you are dangerous to your own side. Director, Alexei blurted out defensively. Your loyalty is not under question at this time, Commander. I accept that. It is how you have occasion to use it. Ellis grunted as he relaxed back into the cushions. Alexei, said Rhea softly into the tense atmosphere. I know the existence of Earth is relegated to mystics and fringe cultures, and I will readily admit that I too, until recently, didn't give the stories too much credit. Each culture needs its legends, we have ours, and strangely or not, it is the same as the corporations. But we could quite possibly have had a mutual origin with or without it being on a planet on the other side of the galaxy. And before you say it, yes, it was very convenient that the ark carrying humankind's entire history was lost. Neither do I know where the remaining arks or any trace of them are, or if proof anything in the legends ever existed. It is up to one to believe, and I did not until I opened that crushed little spacecraft. Now I know, Alexei, Earth does. Or did exist. Her words were so passionate, so spoken from the heart that Alexei could not reply. At last he mumbled a few words. Professor. Rhea. I'm sorry. I do not doubt your sincerity. I plead that you were right, and our culture can have had such an origin, rather than being the planet hoppers we know ourselves as. Yes, I want to believe, but I can't. I am a soldier. I must believe what I see for myself. That's enough, snapped Ellis. I've heard what I want to hear from both of you. He stood up and walked to the hearth, reached onto the mantelpiece and took a smoking pipe from the shelf. Only the crackle of the fire echoed around the room as he stuffed a small wad of brown shredded leaf into the pipe's bowl. He bent down and lit a taper from the flames and drew deeply. Well, Commander. For a second Alexei thought he was about to be dismissed. Are you prepared to do what you claim? Claim? Director, I don't know what is being asked of me. As I have said, I am a soldier. With all due respect, history is, well, at least this kind of history, is of no use to me on the bridge of the warrior. Well, that's where you are so very wrong, Commander. More wrong than you realize. Our future lies 40,000 turns in the past, and the ship you command is one of the very few that can ensure us any future at all. I still don't understand. But Alexei lied. He knew what was about to be said, but his heart refused to accept it until he heard the words. Damn it, Commander, are you thick? I want you to return to the beginning of our history. I'll do it. Came the immediate and abrupt reply. What? Yes. Well, good. Then it is settled. He looked at Rhea. 2 parts, did you say, Professor? Yes. Then there is only one more thing. Commander, this mission could be more dangerous than it sounds. I want every single member of your crew to volunteer. There will be no problem, Director. There's not one of them that haven't already put their life on the line. When I tell them they will fight for the chance. That's the point, they are not to know. Not to know. Not to know what, Director? Nothing, Commander. Nothing at all. I want every one of your crew to volunteer to blindly follow you. But my I.C? Not even your second in command. Alexei was a military man, he understood security, but their lives depended on logistics. I understand, Director, but the warrior needs appropriate data and adequate fuel, and the crew needs suitable provisions. Not your navigator, not your engineer, not even whoever it is who runs your canteen. Nobody, Commander. It was a direct order and he tried to hide his displeasure. Even under the condition he had no doubt they all would leap at the opportunity, but his command ran a little differently to that. Yes, he was ultimately in control, that was beyond question, but his door was always open. It was what made him, him. What had he been called during his last appraisal? Erratic. Yes, he was. If a good idea came up in a briefing and it wasn't his, or what he would normally do, he still used it, and on occasion with spectacular results. The corporation could vouch for that. But this was different, they had a right to know. Well, Commander, pressed Ellis. I will put it to my crew as you order, Director. Ellis looked at him coldly as if weighing the answer as defiance. Do what you want. Tell them what you like, but nothing that will indicate why, what or where they will be going. Understand? Alexei nodded sullenly. Ellis looked at Rhea. You can give it to him. She opened an attached case laid beside her chair, and took out a green pouch. The other, said Ellis. It's inside. She handed it to Alexei. Alexei unclipped the catch. Green was for scientific projects. Inside he saw a data tablet and a smaller red pouch. He looked up at Ellis. The green folder contains all the loading and departure information for an exploratory trip to Penjas 3, said Ellis. Ruins were found there recently, and being as it is in the Forbidden Zone, a warship will seem appropriate for carrying civilians. Basically, it says you're going for a quick investigation of the site. And the red? Asked Alexei. When you get to the point designated as limit of last survey, you will contact CSA and inform them that you are about to enter uncharted Penjas space. They will tell you to commence the survey. At that point you will open those sealed orders and change your heading to that described in those documents. From that moment you will personally ensure that no further communications leave your vessel. Once done, and not a moment before, you can inform your crew you are about to enter tachyon space. Time travel? Alexei gasped before he had chance to think. I prefer the other terms, but yes. Alexei felt compelled to point out the obvious. Director, as a commander, it is not for me to question a mission, but time options are against the Articles of Warfare. No, it is not for you to question orders, Commander, but as long as you follow a strict secrecy regime, the corporation will never know. Anyway, by your reputation, I doubt another transgression would seem to bother you too much. Again Rhea came in as peacemaker. Alexei. Earth is a long way away, even using the closest folds in space-time. Even at light speed it could take many turns to get there. The director tells me that your spacecraft has been into tachyon time and you're back here now. Yes. We have bored past the barrier, but purely as a test. He glanced cautiously at Ellis before continuing. I assume that it has been revealed to you that the Warrior is one of the few craft that has the whole integrity to attempt such a feat, but it wasn't outlawed for no good reason. There is a distinct chance of disintegration, and for the odds of ending up in another universe? Alexei opened his arms wide. She looked at him. I know the risks. I am prepared to take them. Her words surprised him. You? I'm coming with you. Didn't you understand that? Well, no. I thought a few science officers, but I am. Of course. I'm sorry. There is so much to consider. My party will be small, myself and 4 others. 5, plus the Warrior's crew. You know the accommodation arrangements? That it is not designed for that many people? I have been told. He didn't look forward to sharing the Warrior with civilians, especially being as at least one of them would be DSD, but he tried to sound cooperative. I'm sure we can manage, though all of our accommodation will be cramped. More than you think, Commander, said Ellis. You will also be taking a considerable amount of specialized equipment. I see. That's why the 2 parts. Time for your ship to be stripped of everything but essentials. It is a warship, Director. I believe everything already has been taken to that level, he smiled weakly. That we will see, muttered Ellis. Very well, Commander. Go, do what is necessary. Alexei stood. There was one thing, and that is tachyon time. I am greatly concerned that my crew will not have the opportunity to consider its consequences before volunteering. We are at war, Commander. Each time you lift off could be the last. You know that, and they know that. It is something you have already accepted. It is up to you to carry the gravity of the situation to them however you like. But I will warn you that the warrior will go with your crew, or replacements. With you as commander, or with another. Is that clear? Yes, Director. Ellis looked threateningly at him. And any person who happens to find out the destination before you depart will be shipped off to do duty in the furthest mining colony I can find, until you return. Is that clear? As crystal, Director. Ellis looked at the timepiece on the wall. I will allow you until after the mid-meal to make arrangements and inform your crew to be back on the 17th. Any that are not back will report to Fleet Administration for reassignment. Including yourself. Some will have arranged shuttles to their home planets. That is not much time for them to change their plans. Then go, Commander. More time passes even as we talk. Alexei walked back to the door. Part of him was bursting with excitement at what lay ahead. He was ready to go now, and he was certain the others would be with him, if only he could tell them. He had never lied to them before. Yes, he had bent the truth, but not the outright lie he felt he was now faced with. It sat heavily on him. They all could die, and not even in a blaze of glory. They would just pop out of existence, and no one would ever know. What the hell if the corporation found out? They didn't want a burnt cinder any more than the Alliance did. He passed his hand over the door activator and pulled it open, then stopped and turned. Ellis was leaning down towards Rhea. Alexei spoke hesitantly the inner sanctum. Ellis looked up. What about it? Another commander was considered. You are commander of the vessel. Protocol determines only that you be considered first. He went to speak to the professor again, but Alexei persisted. I was spoken against. Prove me wrong, Commander.